Hey there, everybody. Good morning to you. I guess I don't know if it's actually morning, but it's morning here in the past. I know that the birds are singing, the sun is shining, and most importantly, clink, I have my coffee. So life's pretty good, but you know where life wasn't good? In the British colonies. Might be too cheesy to keep in. We'll see. Anyway, we are continuing. This is video number 2. So this should be the second video notes that you are watching. Just going along with your first notes, right, which were about the road to revolution, why the colonists had to get so angry and have themselves a revolution and create America. And yeah, we're going to do a little more setup, and then this video will take us to 1770, which might feel like a random year, but it's not. It's when the Boston Massacre happened. Spoiler alert for the Boston Massacre. But more on that later. So anyway, let's start with the Navigation Act, okay? And remember, yesterday it takes a little bit of review to talk about mercantilism, right? And this is the philosophy of the British. You want to export stuff to other countries, but you don't want to import things from other countries. Okay, that's one of the reasons you have colonies, is to make money with them. But remember, that's a different reasoning than what most American colonists want. They're just like Americans today. They want the best product at the best price. That makes a lot of sense. I don't even think that's probably not even limited to Americans. That's just a thing people want. So the colonists were trading with everybody. And so there's this thing called the Navigation Acts. And every European power with colonies, the French, the Spanish, the Dutch, maybe the Dutch a little bit less, but the French and the Spanish, they also will have laws like this for their colonists. They're just obviously, this is American history class, so we're going to talk about the British government, but just know this type of thing is everywhere, and the colonists really don't like it, and they tend to ignore it for a long period of time. So what is it? The Navigation Act said colonists can only trade with Britain. Okay? Now remember, colonies involve taking a little chunk of your country and putting it elsewhere. So, for example, if you live in Georgia, your neighbors, you got Native Americans, and the colonists were still allowed to trade with Native Americans, by the way. This is more for Europeans. But if you're in Georgia, your neighbors are Native Americans, then you got South Carolina north of you, and then you have Spanish Florida up until 1763. You have Spanish Florida to the south of you. If you are in New York, right, which had those Dutch roots, you have Dutch ships and French ships and Spanish ships showing up all the time. The Caribbean is right there, and a lot of these colonists want to trade goods that they can get from the Caribbean. And in the Caribbean, the British have islands, but so do the Dutch and the French and the Spanish, and you don't really want to be limited in who you're trading with. So the Navigation Acts are there, the British saying basically, hey, you have got to trade just with us. No matter what you're trading, it goes to England, okay? And yeah, there's all sorts of reasons for why the colonists would want to trade with other people, better quality prices, or just even it being available, right? If Britain isn't producing enough of a thing and you want to get your hands on it, you might need to get it from somewhere else. It's pretty simple, right? Again, for about 100 years when this law is on the books, this is actually really old. These are really old laws from the late 1600s. It's ignored. So colonists will smuggle. Okay, smuggling is when you trade things illegally in some fashion. America was founded on smuggling, believe it or not, in no small part. And so one of the things that really makes the colonists angry is that the British want to enforce this. We'll talk about that with writs of assistance. I'm just going to talk about it right now. So how the British enforce this is with this thing called writs of assistance. Okay, so nowadays in 2025, if the Government wants to search you, the police or whoever it might be, they need to have what's called a warrant. And that warrant is going to have a cause. They're going to say, hey, Mr. Gone was acting suspicious, and so we need to go and look at his stuff. We need to go into his house and search that place for this, this, and this. So they'll say what they're searching for. They'll say why they think that person should be searched. And a judge can look at a warrant and be like, no, this doesn't pass the test. You cannot use this as a warrant to go and search the stuff. Writs of assistance, and that tradition goes back all the way to England. England had those things. Writs of assistance are like blanket warrants. So it says, hey, you can be searched because you're a colonist. That's all the cause we need. That's pretty offensive if you're a colonist. We're going to we'll put aside for a second that a lot of these, this was used mainly for ships that were coming in with cargo from across the sea. And what you would usually do is you'd go to Britain, you'd be what do you guys say? A good boy. You'd be a good boy and you'd get some British goods, but then maybe you'd pop over to the Caribbean or to Africa. All these countries do have colonies all over the Atlantic. So you'd maybe go to the French Caribbean islands or the Spanish Caribbean. You'd get on some goods or the Dutch, you'd get on some goods that were not British, that you weren't supposed to get your hands on. You'd kind of mix them all together and then you'd just sell it, right? We're looking for the best goods at the best price for our customers. That's how merchants are working. And so the British are searching all the ships coming into the colonies, looking for contraband. Really makes the colonists angry, right? The Fourth Amendment is written in no small part because of this, and we'll talk about that when we get to government. So yeah, just know, even today, and then in England back then, why? All right, I think we're back. In England back then, you would end up having to have a reason to search something. You'd have to go through the due process of talking to a judge and saying, hey, here's why we're suspicious. You can't just say we're suspicious of everyone, we're searching everyone. You're not supposed to get too much into people's business. All right. Oh my gosh, can I pause this? And we're back. Hopefully that was seamless. I don't really know. So we'll see during editing, I guess, and maybe you'll never see this conversation. Maybe you'll. Anyway, doesn't matter. No taxation without representation. So this was a big rallying cry for the colonists in the 1760s and 1770s. Okay, so again, colonists are not against taxes as a concept. The colonists are paying taxes all the time to their colonial legislature. Okay, so each colony had its own group of representatives who could then pass laws that say, hey, we need money for this, this, and this, and the colonists are paying taxes. In England, that goes back to an English tradition. In England, the group responsible for raising taxes all the way back into the Middle Ages, it was this way, is Parliament. So a group of people who half of them are elected, half of them aren't, basically. But they are supposed to represent the people, and they get together and they write laws and they can raise taxes. So the American colonists are not represented in Parliament. They don't have a person who says, I represent South Carolina in their Parliament, like we kind of have today in our Congress. We have that in the Senate anyway. And they were still having taxes now passed on them directly, which hadn't been the case before. And so they start to get really mad. And no taxation without representation is the rallying cry again. So you might hear throughout your life, people who only are kind of more casually into history and stuff, you hear the American Revolution is about taxes. And the answer is like, yes, but not about the idea that you wouldn't pay them. It's about who has the authority and why to levy those taxes. So it gets a little more complex that way. But you got to have representation in a government that is trying to tax you. That goes all the way back to the 1200s is the first idea of that concept in the English tradition. And it's a big fact. I'm going to stop because I'm getting too nerdy for you. You're just like, Mr. God, just stop. But it goes all the way back to the English Revolution. They actually had 100 years before this, which, again, is a thing that all of our founding fathers would have known about. So there you go. All right. The Sugar Act. So this is kind of the first rumbling that the British are going to be taxing the colonists more. It's a tax on molasses. It is not a tax on sugar. Molasses is kind of like discount syrup, I guess. But in a world without processed sugar and artificial flavors that we have now, molasses is really good. I just want to tell you, and if you want to, send me a Canvas message and tell me I'm wrong, that's fine. But molasses isn't good. Okay, it's mid at best, as you children would say. It's like kind of okay. It's kind of sweet, but it's like super gooey. You can put it on stuff. They were using it. The colonists used it a lot to make rum out of. So there's like several other things you could even do with it. But anyway, it's big for the rum industry and as like a condiment. The act technically cuts the tax. So before this, it had been too high, so high that no one paid it. It was 6 pennies a gallon. Wow. And because of that, no one paid it. And the British officials were like, yeah, that's too high. You're good. And so people were just not paying. So it actually cut that tax in half. But what it also did in the Sugar Act is it got a lot more tax enforcers over to the colonies. So we're going to lower your taxes, but we're going to heighten enforcement. Because even though the tax had been high, theoretically, before this, there was like no one around to really collect it in a lot of places, and so you just ignore it. Okay, difference between a law that's on the books and enforcement there. You got a group called the Sons of Liberty, very important. These are the colonists who stand up to the British in the 1760s and 1770s before, we're marching armies around. They organize protests, so they are a guy who's usually going to be, or guys who are usually known around town. They have meetings, they talk politics. If something bad is happening, and they might say, hey, we're going to go protest this. Popular ways to protest back then, you'd play music. You'd go to maybe outside someone's house. You might make a stuffed doll of them and burn it publicly. It's called burning an effigy. They did that a lot. They also organized boycotts, which was a big deal. Now, they called them non-importation agreements, but basically there are several parts of this story where the colonists will stop buying British stuff. And that is important because the British want to make money in the colonies. That's the whole reason. And they want raw goods from the colonies, and then they want the colonists to buy British stuff. So if you do without or you make your own, you can really hurt the British economically. If you don't follow the boycott, if you're a shop owner selling British goods during one of these non-importation agreements, you might find your shop burnt down by the Sons of Liberty. You might find yourself beat up, or you might get tarred and feathered, which was one of their favorite things to do. Which, again, in old movies, they kind of make it look a little silly sometimes. But tar was burning hot, almost boiling when they poured it on people's skin. And then you stick feathers on them, and it takes a long time for those burns to heal. So anyway, don't need to get too much into tarring and feathering, but it's rough business. Okay. This video is too long. Sorry, everyone. Let me just check here. Oh, we're golden. Okay, so Stamp Act. This is the next tax the British try. This really makes people angry. So the Stamp Act taxes paper items like dice, cards. I know dice aren't paper. But dice, cards, wills, contracts, and newspapers, basically for it to be official, for it to be okay for you to sell, or for it to be legally binding, you would have to buy this stamp, right? And it would have to be on there. So the people paying the tax physically are the business types. Now they're going to pass it on, like any of these taxes that could happen, they're going to pass it on to the consumer. But the people first affected by this are the lawyers and the journalists. Now, if you're ever trying to run a government, I'm going to tell you right now, if you're ever trying to run a government, The people who can make your life hard very quickly are lawyers and journalists, because lawyers they can sue you, they can say this law is against what we need to be doing. They know how to organize a lot of the time. They know a lot of angry people potentially. And then journalists can make you look absolutely awful in the press, which they did. So there you go. And you're affecting them directly. So it leads to the Stamp Act Congress. Okay? Stamp Act Congress is a big deal because it's the first time that we'll talk about in our class. There was one tiny one before this. It's fine. But basically the first time groups of these colonies get together to try and affect action. Okay, try and do something together. We're all in this together, except for 4 of the colonies, because only 9 colonies send representatives. The reason for that, the reason that they have to get together is because, and the reason it's a big deal is because all 13 colonies thought of themselves almost as 13 little mini countries. They were all loyal to Britain. Okay, but South Carolinian didn't think of themselves of having anything in common with someone from Massachusetts, a Massachusettsian. And so the Stamp Act Congress is a really big deal. They send a letter to the king. They're like, hey, King, Congress. Hey, King, Parliament messed up in passing the Stamp Act. Can you get rid of it? And then they said also, we're going to work together with colonies to make sure that the colonial governments are enforcing non-importation. They're not allowing British goods into the colonies. And Parliament ended up repealing the Stamp Act because of the Stamp Act Congress. But they did this fun thing. I think this is always like kind of a parent-to-child thing, where they have a thing called the Declaratory Act. They passed a whole law that says, hey, we could tax you if we wanted. We just happen to not want to. Yes, you've complained a lot, and yes, we now don't want to do the Stamp Act, but we could do it if we wanted to. We have every right. I just think it's so funny. All right, so a non-importation agreement, it's a boycott when groups of people stop by, it's a boycott, which is when groups of people stop, oh my gosh, buying. They aren't like stopping by for a visit. Stop buying a certain good or from a business for political reasons. In this case, it's a country, not a business. So yeah, non-importation agreements were agreements among the colonies to not buy British goods. So British merchants, this is really why the Stamp Act Congress was so effective. British merchants who are in London, who are well connected to Parliament, were the ones who go and they're like, hey, the colonists mean business. This is bad for my business. You need to get rid of the Stamp Act. All right, the Quartering Act. This is one that the colonists hated. That is also protected in our Bill of Rights. They hated it so much they made the Third Amendment. Quartering Act said that the British could station soldiers among the colonists. So you might have like a British officer who's boarded in your home, living with you. They had what's called a town common. I think kind of like a big public park. You can still go to Boston Common today, actually. But on Boston Common, there would be like a military camp. Are you going to have fun enjoying the park with your family with soldiers there? Probably not. But just remember, in the English tradition, even more than the British tradition, you are hesitant about standing armies. You don't like the army being near you. You know the army is needed. You know it needs to go do things. Britain's fighting wars left, right, and center. But you don't really revere your soldiers in the same way we do now. You might revere their leaders, but not the common soldiers. And you also don't really want them near you. In English history, which is the history the colonists think they're living in and are living in until 1776, armies are used by kings to take power that doesn't belong to them, to oppress people. So when the British passed the Quartering Act and they're like, yo, we're just going to put soldiers in your cities, and it was really to enforce kind of these taxes and laws, make sure that things didn't get out of control, the colonists hated that. So yeah, protected by your Third Amendment right. All right, 1767, we get the Townshend Acts. This is supposed to actually make a lot of money. Tea, lead, paint, glass, paper are all things the colonists can't make themselves. So Parliament's like, okay, we'll tax those things. Leads to more boycotts. People are especially disrespectful in Boston. Boston is going to become kind of the center of the early revolution, as we'll see. Okay, so we have the Townshend Acts going on. They chug along. They eventually get repealed due to the boycotts. Things do come to a head. This is like, if you want to think of this like a roller coaster, like in the Declaration of Independence is where they fall off the cliff and we're in a war. The Boston Massacre is like a first little pre-bump, okay? So there's British soldiers in Boston in 1770, and they're protecting a customs house. They're there to protect a customs house. There's a lot of tension between the soldiers and Bostonians. British soldiers are pretty poorly paid, so they will take part-time jobs, which means that they take pay away from a lot of the poor Bostonians and just everyday Bostonians, really, not even like the poor ones. And they also, we have the English tradition of hating standing armies being stationed among you, okay? And the British soldiers, a lot of them really probably didn't want to be there if you think about it, so far from home. So there's always there's violence between them. There's trading of insults. There are brawls before the Boston Massacre. But the night of March 5th, 1770, it's cold in Boston on March 5th, 1770, so there's snow on the ground. It's important to the story. And there's like one guy guarding this customs house door. Customs house, you collect the money from customs. That's the taxes we've been talking about. You collect that money, you put it in the customs house. You can still go see the customs house today, by the way. And a crowd of colonists starts to, gather, yelling insults at him and all this stuff, which is a pretty standard thing to have happen. And things escalate. They start throwing snowballs, chunks of ice, rocks. They have these clubs. They don't hit them immediately, but they have these clubs that are used for hitting ropes on ships because they're all dock workers. So they can be pretty threatening. Okay, so he calls for help. A guy named Captain Preston shows up, so he's in charge. He has 8 soldiers under him now, and they line up in front of the customs house to protect it and try and get the crowd to disperse. No one knows who fired the first shot of the Boston Massacre, but a shot rings out, and then a volley rings out. All the soldiers fire. When that happens, 5 colonists are left dead by the experience. The colonists put Captain Preston and the soldiers on trial. I don't want to talk about that too much because we have the Boston Massacre activity. John Adams is their defense attorney, though. And it basically results in it results in the British removing the soldiers from Boston. But the colonists now are like, well, standing armies definitely are terrible. The British don't have our backs. Shocking, I know. Soldiers are firing into the crowd. So it is a big victory for people who are kind of like, hey, we need to not have the British in the colonies. They need to leave us alone. No one's talking independence yet. They're talking, go back to how it was. Just leave us alone. Yes, we're loyal to the king. Now leave us alone. So that's like the first phase. Okay, we have a lot of taxes, and we have colonists complaining about them. They are organizing boycotts, protests, they're writing letters to the king. So no armed conflict other than maybe the Boston Massacre. But in this phase, and even the beginning of the next phase, it's important to remember they aren't fighting for rights as Americans. There's no such thing as American. They are fighting for the rights they have as English people. Okay, they are saying, hey, we came over here, and our ancestors really came over here, and we were supposed to have the exact same rights as we had back in England. Well, you're not living up to your end of the bargain. You're taxing us without representation. You're stationing armies among us. You're regulating who we can trade with, all this stuff. And so that's going to cause a whole lot of issues. I wonder if anything will come of that. I'm just kidding. I know it does. Goodbye.